Hello everyone. I'm delighted you could all join us this morning for what promises to be a fascinating exploration of the potential of public-private partnerships. We've been writing more and more about such partnerships in Property Week over the past year, and they've become a real catalyst for development and regeneration, a catalyst that seems to have been given added momentum by the devolution and Northern Powerhouse agenda. But could such partnerships be under threat if we leave Europe? It's a question we will be debating during the panel discussion that I'm chairing shortly. We also have a panel debate chaired by my colleague Adam Branson to look forward to, as well as some all-important case studies and keynote presentations from Lord Adonis and Pat Ritchie. There will also be an opportunity to network during the coffee break and lunch. I hope that's not my phone. Please tell me that's not my phone. Thank you. And there'll also be plenty of opportunity to tweet, so please do. It's the hashtag PPS16. But first, to explain why he thinks public-private partnerships play such a critical role, our host, Executive Director of Property and Infrastructure at Capita, Richard McCarthy.
Okay, right, phone's off, and welcome and thank you very much, Liz. So listen, we've got an absolutely packed agenda here today, and I just want to say a couple of logistics about that. First of all, to our speakers, think about the time limit you've been given and then shorten it. Think about the answers you want to give and halve them. Think about the questions the rest of you would like to ask. Get those ready, short, punchy, maximise the benefit of the time we've got. Think about outcomes, think about impacts. Oh, hang on a second, isn't that the message about public sector property? Outcome and impact. Indeed, yes it is. We know that there's no end in sight to austerity. We know that there are some great things happening with public property. We know, and we'll hear today, about some exciting initiatives and partnerships between private sector providers and public sector owners. But I think if we also take a step back, we know that there's more that we can do and we need to do. Some of that is just about more imagination. We need to think harder and we need to work harder about the buildings and the land that we want to keep in the public sector. Maximise that benefit and that value. We will find that we have more assets that we can then work harder to deliver wider outcomes, be they social, be they about housing, be they about growing the economy and making great places work better. So there is much more I think we can and need to do. And that's not just directed at the public sector. That's not just someone now in the private sector thinking, come on government, local and national, pull your finger out, work harder with us. This is a challenge for all of us. For all of you in the private sector, we need to demonstrate that we can bring true added value, that we can bring a different dimension. When we turn up and we want to represent our case, we want to put forward an argument about why people should work with us, we can't just simply say it's because we're here and because we've got some financial freedoms. And we're very good at making a set of demands about what should be done. Well, we have to put an offer on the table as well. We have to make it clear why doing things differently produces different impacts. So I want to talk just for a few minutes about the now, about unlocking that value and really delivering the impact. And it's not rocket science, and yet I still feel that some of the messages here still seem new, still seem relevant for us to talk about and to reflect on. So we need to get the mindset right first. We need a right mix and an alignment around vision and around drive, what I call now the va-va-voom of the public property mindset. Have we got that right at the beginning? Are we absolutely clear about what we want to do in the terms of our vision? And are we all signed up to put that extra effort in to make it happen? And then it's about investing to get it right at the beginning, not waiting to fix things that didn't quite work out. Investing to ensure there's real clarity of purpose, of roles and accountability. Investing to ensure we really are aligned in our interests. That we have the right timescales. and we are truly being ambitious. And then that moves on to being focused on results. Are we really clear that we've got a results-driven mindset? Where the only thing that matters, there are odd rules that we absolutely have to observe, but by and large, all of us in this room invent rules that don't have to be observed. Think local government is hampered by rules, which actually maybe it's not, or we invent our own rules when we don't see different ways through them. So are we really clear that we're going to be focused on delivering the outcomes, and that we're going to reward, and we have to have that reward sense across both parties. There needs to be a sense of reward and recognition for getting it right. And getting it right is the outcome, not the process. And there must be an expectation. An expectation. That all the time, all of us in this room and our colleagues out there expect and see insight, ingenuity, and innovation. In solutions design and execution, in collaboration, and in process. We love doing things sequentially. We love it. Planners in the room, you really adore sequences. It's time to think faster and harder about parallel working. Time to think differently about what is the process that we must do to respect public accountability and fair procurement, and yet delivers outcomes faster. Do you know what? We can do it, and we've done it before. Because really what this is all about is one word, 3 times. Leadership, leadership, and as Tony Blair would say, leadership. And actually, that is the story. And that's leadership, and I look at Richard, at a political level. And I have given this advice to Secretaries of State that I've worked with. If you exercise true political leadership and sponsorship, you will make things happen. And in fact, if you look at government locally, you look at government centrally, when the chips are down, when something has to happen, it moves much faster than the private sector. It galvanizes itself, it makes things happen, it has a capability to do things which I think is awe-inspiring. And as executives, our job is to create structures and opportunities and give advice to our political leaders to enable that to happen. And underneath that, we've got to create teams that win. And let's be competitive. Let's think about how we win. We've set some really tough targets. Let's get world-beating aspirations. We can do it. We tie ourselves down. We hamper ourselves. We wear responsibility heavy on our shoulders rather than treat it with excitement because we're here to do really challenging and impossible things. Now, we did it in 2012, and a number in this room would have been involved in that process, as I was. It was an extraordinary period. We worked out how to do things quickly. We used public sector land, and we mixed that with some private sector land. We bought it quickly. We backed local government to make the planning decision rather than taking it centrally ourselves, and they were faster than we could have done it. We created structures. We created a funding arrangement, albeit the funding arrangement was kind of after we won the bid, and then we gave people power to exercise decisions at a local level to drive results. Now, we can all say the Olympics are unique and the Olympics are different, and in some respects that's entirely true, but the mindset is not. If we want to make something happen, if we see political and executive leadership, do you know what? We can do things we didn't think were possible. I see it happening now back in our own organisation. I know that we can do more. And I hope you get lots of excitement, lots of ideas, and I hope you're part of that story today as we work that much harder with that much more impact and that much more speed to get the best value from the way the public and the private work together to drive that value out of our public sector land and buildings. And so with no further ado, we're going to go into one of our first panel sessions. Fast, furious, and over to Liz.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
One clap. You did better than me. So what we're going to be talking about and debating is how to get the public and private sectors pulling in the same direction. I would like 5 minutes at the end to get some questions from the floor, so be thinking about those questions from the outset. And I'll also be putting a question to you at the very end as well. So, first of all, let's get some introductions from the panel, starting with
Ken Dietor, Urban Catalyst, very much a rich history in public-private partnership. I was Crown Estate Commissioner, then 11 years at British Land Development Director. I've worked as Ministerial Advisor to the Under Secretary of State for Defence. I've been on the main board of major university, English heritage, etc., etc. A great believer in public-private partnership and actually believe it's the way of the future. We have to work in partnership with government.
Paul Clark from Capital Real Estate. I lead the development team within Jill Hearn, which is part of the Capital Group. We fundamentally specialise in securing delivery of development, and often that involves a transaction. I'd say about 50% of our projects involve the public sector as landowners, and we are intensely focused on creating outcomes that meet broader social and economic objectives when we're working with them. I'm also currently working 3 days a week at DCLG with Katie and the team, where I'm looking at how the government can support greater private sector engagement in the estates regeneration process, and be working with them for the next 6 months or so.
Hello, I'm Katie Law. I'm the Deputy Director for Land and Housing Delivery at the Department for Communities and Local Government. I'm currently responsible for the release of public sector land to support home building and investment in large sites, including the Garden Towns and Communities programme. So that's funding, championing, ensuring the conditions are right for success in major projects such as Bicester and Ebbsfleet. I'm new to this role, but I'm really enjoying the chance to get to grips with an incredibly inspiring and important agenda. And I think I hopefully bring a bit of a fresh pair of eyes, so very much here to listen. I definitely don't have all the answers. But like my colleagues, completely agree that public-private partnerships are absolutely sort of essential to this agenda.
Thanks.
I'm Richard Cornelius. I'm leader of Barnet Council. I've been a councillor for 10 years, 5 years into being leader. And when I started, I had no idea that I would have to be a completely unqualified property developer. But actually, it is the way forward for local authorities in that we can answer our need for revenue by developing some of the land that we have. And as a matter of interest, Barnet is, I think, the second largest delivery in the southeast of England, second only to the Thames Gateway, and pretty uncharacteristic for a Conservative authority, but we're doing it.
Great. And my name is Ken Xiao, and I'm working in the CBI China business team. And our role is really to look after Chinese investors and bring them to and invest in the UK, in Europe, and help them to find the right opportunity and going through a different process of their investment and development. And the team was set up in 2007. We started with looking after their occupiers' requirement. And then from 2009, we start to see Chinese investors coming here to acquire and either income-producing assets or involved in development side. And so far, we were involved in probably more than 80% of the major Chinese transactions in the UK, including the first headquarter building by Bank of China, ICBC Construction Bank, and the transaction done by Ping An, China Life, and Fosun, Coley, and Poly, and lots of others. And now we have a team of 7 and really try to look after Chinese investors in every aspect. And what's quite interesting is that over the last few years, we see increasingly growth pace and from Chinese investors into this country, and it now become a quite active group of players. And the first wave of them tend to be those institutional money or sovereign wealth fund coming here to acquire office building for diversification purposes. And once they get more experience in the market, now they start to want to involve in residential development or mixed-use development opportunities. And the typical example is Wanda, Greenland, and Wanke. They started with want to do things on their own, then they go through various challenges. And now they realize the importance of having partnership with local player and with government. And now the active way is really into the development sectors with partners. So today I'm quite happy to share more about the challenge and requirements and from the Chinese investor and how they're open to work with the local partner and government really. Thank you.
Graham.
I'm Graham Gray, Director of Commercial
Development and Transport for London, so I'm responsible for TfL's non-fares revenues, which equates to 3.4 billion over 10 years. After 2 years, we've delivered 457 against a target of 403, so we're ahead of target. What makes most money is advertising, but property development, we are forecasting revenues of 1.1 billion over the next 8 years. So whether it's advertising or property development or sponsorship or retail or anything else, we can't do that by ourselves. We've got just about the best asset base in the capital, and my challenge is to identify and work with the best of the private sector in order to unlock the huge opportunities that come from that.
Thank you very much. I mean, I guess the first question is, where are we right now when it comes to public-private partnerships? What's the sort of lay of the land? Katie?
So I think everybody recognises that partnerships are absolutely critical to success on this agenda. And just a word about the public policy landscape that I think you'll all be familiar with. So government has set some very ambitious targets, is strongly committed to increasing housing supply. We've got an ambition to build 1 million more homes by 2020, have 1 million more homeowners, particularly first-time buyers. And we've put in place a very wide range of initiatives and a policy framework that I won't go into here, including wide-ranging reforms to housing and planning policy to help reach these ambitions. But in the short space of time I've been working on this agenda, two things are very clear to me. And firstly, that we can't make any progress unless we work very closely in partnership with the private sector. And secondly, that partnerships to me, and we've already touched on some of this in the keynotes, are fundamentally about people and about relationships, not really about structures and processes, although these can absolutely help. So my sense, in terms of why is this partnership so critical, I guess there are a number of factors that mean that the public sector and the private sector absolutely must work in tandem. So if I think about what the public sector can bring to the table, we've already talked about this, but obviously the political will and commitment, and that's really crucial, as you all know, to building market confidence. We've had the example already about the Olympics, for example, very iconic example. Secondly, the ability to kind of create that stable and conducive policy and regulatory environment. I think there's always a really tricky trade-off for government here between doing things that will unblock barriers, make life easier, but at the same time maintaining certainty, maintaining stability. Thirdly, access to finance and capital funding, again in very specific circumstances where the market can't provide that. That's a really important role for us. Fourth, and I guess this is very much what Richard was touching on in terms of a responsibility to residents and communities through the democratic process, that ability to kind of champion the voice of the community. And then finally, and very close to my particular heart, a steady flow of developable land, because that's one of my responsibilities. And the government, as you probably know, has already set an ambition, a very ambitious commitment to release enough land for 160,000 homes by 2020. Estimates vary, but some say over a third of developable land is currently in the public sector. And we heard from Paul about how many of his projects are public sector land. And I think the key message I guess I'd like to leave you with in terms of some of the foundation for this partnership is that we very much want this to be seen as a very rich seam of opportunity. So government departments are taking very widespread reforms to managing their asset bases, their land bases. You've got, for example, MOD, Ministry of Defence, looking to right-size its estate over 15 years. That may lead to a reduction in the estate of around 30%. You've got the NHS really looking at getting best value from their sites. Ministry of Justice looking at court reform, maybe up to about 80 sites being released. So really, land is a very important ingredient to this, and that's where we hope that we can start to create some really exciting opportunities going forward. In terms of the private sector, again, you will know much better than me, but certainly from where I sit, that commercial expertise, increased investment, and the absolutely essential skills right through the supply chain, from design, placemaking, and delivery. We absolutely cannot possibly do this without the private sector.
And do you see more appetite from the private sector now then? And I mean, have we got some forward momentum when it comes to partnerships, or? Could we be doing more? I mean, can I sort of bring Ken in at this point?
Yeah, no, surely. We've just, as our consortium, urban-led consortium, just signed agreements on Purfleet for a major 1.4 billion development in partnership with Thurrock Council. We've just brought L&Q in as a joint partner with us, and we'll be delivering over 3,000 homes plus 750,000 square feet of film and TV studios. Yes, there is a real appetite, but the procurement process is obviously taking us along. I mean, it's taken us 3 years to get to where we are. And that's something that is a deterrent to investors. The investors certainly want to invest in public sector cash flows. It's the timescale for actually getting delivery that's the big issue for us. And somehow we have to work together, and that's a combined problem for both public and private sector, to actually get the procurement process working faster and more efficiently.
But you do think the desire is there to work in partnership?
There's huge desire, and I think actually if we can address some of those issues about getting faster delivery, there's the investor appeal is substantial. I've worked in China since 2007, and I have a lot of contacts through Far East and China. There's a massive appetite. Britain's seen as probably one of the best locations in the world to invest. London is certainly the best city in the world, in my opinion, and it's a good place. People want to be here.
Ken, tell me a little bit more about the Chinese investor appetite for public-private partnerships.
Well, and I think I completely echo on what Ken said. So now Chinese investor, for last 10 years, especially last 5 years, they accumulate lots of wealth and financial capability from China, and now it's really they see the point to go overseas, and especially with the first wave of investors already have good examples on successful example on the ground, like Wanda invest in 9M and Greenland project, and the first project working with local sort of public sectors and private is probably the BCEG's project. And in Manchester Airport City, jointly with the Manchester Airport Authority and the local pension funds and the local constructor, the developer, 4.5 million and mixed use and office, commercial, logistic and facility near the airport. So overall the interest is still very strong
But it wasn't originally, was it? They came in and wanted to do it themselves. Now they're realising that it's a bit easier if they...
Yes, exactly. And one of the early story we always talk about is that the large Chinese developer, they come here, they go aside and develop 400 or 500 units. It's actually quite a small size compared with the scale they have in China. And they quite naturally, they want to bring their methodology, their model to London. They went to the city hall to meet the mayors and show the mayor the idea, what they want to do. And the mayor say, oh, we welcome the idea, we will support it. And then they run away, they think, oh, I got the planning permission. And then they start saying, oh, without planning permission, we can start to sell at the end of the year. And in 2 years' time, they realize they still haven't got the planning permission.
So it shows you, doesn't it, there's that gulf of understanding, really. Maybe we can bring Richard in here at this point. How do you sort of see the differences between the aspirations of the public and the private sector? What are the biggest...
Well, I think the danger is using the word partnership, actually. It's a commercial relationship. Everyone has to benefit from a deal, otherwise it doesn't happen. I share the Chinese investors' frustration with the speed of the process. I'm an old man in a hurry. I want to see these things built by the time I die. And it is so frustrating, the process that we have to go through. And even when there is political will to get something done from all levels of governments and lots of institutions, even the private sector has slow decision making. It has to be referred to a board meeting. It's got to go to another board meeting. It's got to go to the board of trustees. Oh, for heaven's sake, they just need to make their minds up sometimes, we feel. And yet the public sector can introduce delays as well. And why does it take so long? None of us know, but we're all frustrated by it. I think there should be a great drive from the private sector and the public sector to just get on with it.
But what about the different aspirations, though? I mean, do they come in with slightly different expectations?
Well, the private sector wants profit. Okay, that's great. And the public sector, we need housing, we need to regenerate areas, but we also need a revenue stream as well. So actually, it is it is a similar approach.
Okay, so actually the sort of
The division isn't there, really.
it's not as obvious as some people think it is. In fact, there are aligned principles there. Okay,
Exactly.
and what about the size of the prize? Graham, tell me what you think can be done when a public-private partnership is working really well. What can we see delivered over the...
From a TfL point of view, and then we'll talk more broadly, so we need to generate over £1 billion. We need to provide thousands, tens of thousands of homes that Londoners can afford. I am keen that we also think afresh about our stations and the role of our stations and how, stations could and should be able to offer more than just somewhere where you can buy a newspaper and a coffee, and maybe at a large one get your passport photo taken. Our stations are in the centre of the villages and towns and cities that make up London, and we've got over 400 of them. And if we're investing in them, and if we're thinking afresh as to how London needs to grow, how people will be living and working in London in the future, that's, for me, a rather more interesting question than just how do we make the money. We do need to make the money, but I think in making the money, thinking long term, we'll ultimately generate a lot more money, both in the short and the long term, by thinking as imaginatively as we can. Now, I think probably part of what one can get into in these debates is imagining that the public sector's over here and the private sector's over there. In practice, within the public sector, there's a whole variety of different objectives that different organisations have. And the challenge here is how can you go through a process that isn't a mechanistic procurement process that you simply follow, but one that you end up with two organisations whose interests are aligned. And how then can you ensure that to the greatest extent possible that alignment remains in place through a contract that may take a number of years. Not every organisation works well with every other organisation, even TfL. And so for me, it's about how do you identify the right partners to take forward the right, the right answer for London. And I'm obviously looking at this from a London point of view. And for me, there is no question that London has the land that London desperately needs. It is a nonsense that large commercial organisations who pay very well are having to buy accommodation for their staff. Because if those sorts of organisations, the Deloittes, the KPMGs of this world, if their staff can't afford to live in London, then London will very quickly cease to grow and function. And I think it's beholden on all of us who either own land or have the ability to bring land forward to address, yes, the commercial imperatives, but also to think imaginatively, creatively about how we make the best use of that land.
So how did you identify your development partners, for instance, for...
We went through
What
a
were you looking
process. We've ended up with 13 development partners. We're now in a position we'll be launching half a dozen or so sites over the course of the next 9 months.
But what were you looking for specifically in those partners?
Above all, from my point of view, the ability to develop in London organisations with credibility and experience of having developed in joint ventures with the public sector around the transport infrastructure in London. But that's, I should emphasise, just the initial portfolio that we've got. We will be working with SMEs, community land trusts, self-build. We will be bringing to market a build-to-rent portfolio. And there's a huge potential for us to work with a number of different organisations. The answer here, from a TfL point of view, given the range and scale of assets we've got, isn't any one organisation or even any one type of organisation. I think it's beholden on us, yes, to work with the large developers who can bring forward large sites, but also in parallel to bring forward other types of sites that will be appropriate to other parts of the industry.
Thanks very much. And I mean, what are the no-nos when you're looking as a public sector player at a private sector? What do you not want to see in a potential partner?
We don't want to be surprised. We want to know what's happening, and the unexpected is always very worrying for us.
So you're looking for an element of transparency all the time, so that
and mutual trust, actually.
Okay, and do you find that that's difficult to strike sometimes then, or?
I'm scarred by one or two things, so I've made sure.
Can you give us any details?
No.
Okay.
But
Paul, I'll bring you in here.
Yeah, I mean, actually, when we've run procurements and partner selections, actually you end up in these quite esoteric internal conversations about what is the nature of a company, what are we buying? Are we just buying a shell? Are we buying a collection of individuals? How much can you guarantee those individuals will still be there? So we, you know, certainly when we've done a few recently, we start trying to lift the lid on processes and systems that sit underneath. You know, and we're always testing that key man issue. Yeah, that team of developers, you know, because often developers actually are quite small companies, you know, tightly formed companies with lots, you know, a really elaborate supply chain, and it's money and expertise that fundamentally the private sector are often looking to acquire in the process, and it's just in trying to kind of get the right balance of security, deliverability, and stability is a really challenging one for the private sector, because you know that London Borough of Barnet, well, you know, there's a fighting chance it will still be there in 100 years as an institution. You might even be a bit bigger, you might have taken over a couple. But you know, actually the lifespan, you even look at, you know, the FTSE 100, FTSE 250, actually there's quite a high turnover, and development companies are quite notorious for that. So it can be quite a challenge, actually.
So, and what are the specific challenges then in working with a council like Barnet?
No challenge with Barnet at all. No, it's a dream come true. One of the challenges is with the public sector. I think what's been alluded to earlier by Graham is actually spending a lot of time understanding what do you want out of this. And we had a roundtable discussion on Friday with the private sector at DCLG, where we talked about what the private sector want from the public sector, and it, you know, it's certainty and clearness, you know, clear purpose. And that sense of, you know, because we've presented with a firm list of wants, then that can be built into the programme. So that's really important, that the public sector have taken the time to think about what they want to achieve.
And Ken, what view are the ingredients of a successful partnership?
Oh, I think it's openness and an understanding from both sides that the other side has to get something out of the deal. Both need to see results. We spend a lot of time in our engagement with the public sector, with our scheme on Thurrock, for example. Last week we had a whole day session at the council offices, and we had 4 1.5-hour sessions with all the senior officers came down, everything from libraries to health, education, to hear what people have got to say, to give them an opportunity to get on the table what they felt they wanted to see out of the development, and then we'll sort of analyse that and go through it to see what we can deliver and be realistic about that.
So there's an element of pragmatism as well that's important.
Absolutely.
And do you think people have unrealistic expectations sometimes going into these partnerships?
I think it's improving. It's getting better. It depends. One has to be very selective on who you partner with. And I think, come back to Katie's point, it's all about individuals too. You know, you need to develop good relationships with the leader, the senior officers, chief executive, and so forth. And of course, elections do get in the way sometimes, which can be a problem. So you need to see, as the private sector and bring in your investors, you need to be able to show stability. So you need to actually have almost a cross-border approach with the various parties at the table and the various stakeholders at the table, so that you can actually, because these development schemes will take 10 to 15 years, that's reality. So
you've got to factor in some churn, haven't you, in personnel?
Of course you have. Anyone that brings one of these major schemes to the table and expects they're going to be delivered in 2 years, that's being unrealistic. You have to actually identify that it will change, it will evolve, and both sides have to be able to adapt to that.
What about the role of leadership? And I'm looking, for obvious reasons, over to you, Richard, here.
Well, leadership is a strange word, isn't it? It's, you know, have a sort of vision of Mussolini on a balcony or something like that. But of course, in local authority terms, it's nothing like that. It is getting things done. And that means cooperation with other public authorities. The Brent Cross Cricklewood deal that we're engaged in at the moment in Barnet has involved a whole myriad of agencies, some of whom I have no idea would have a role. Network Rail, TfL, the GLA, the Mayor's planners, our planners, Highways Agency, Department of Transport, even the Treasury, and as well as 3 layers of government and the local MPs as well. It's been an immensely complicated job, just to line the public sector up. But we have managed to do that, and I suppose that's what I would understand by leadership in the case of one of these deals. Making sure that you can deliver what you have said you will deliver, so that your partners or commercial partners can rely on you to get things done. We have a majority of 1 in Barnet Council, and that's a fairly delicate majority, and it relies on people being willing to come out of hospital to vote. But we haven't lost any of these planning votes, and we have tried to make most of the deals that we've done party politics proof, so that the opposition are signed up to them. There'll be differences in nuance, but broadly speaking, the strategy is accepted across Barnet, and I guess that's part of leadership as well.
So there's obviously an example of good leadership there. Are there too many examples still of poor leadership? Is this holding partnerships back, do we think? Katie?
I mean, I think there are always examples of good and bad leadership, and I think what matters is, you know, leadership isn't a sort of fixed thing. That's kind of, it's about leadership for the circumstance and for the right blend of partnerships and partners and skills that you need to bring to the table. So I think what matters is the ability to learn from experience and to kind of take action when things are, you know, not going smoothly. And I think that is something that we are collectively getting better at as the kind of will to make this work, you know, grows, and as people's sort of level of experience grows, really. So,
Thanks. And what are the sort of big obstacles in the way of an effective public-private partnership? Paul, what do you think?
Well, as you said, I mean, some of the key issues that are fed back to us is procurement, which is an interesting challenge. But you know, actually, procurement, I think we've gone too far slavishly adhering to these perceived structures that people believe. You know, the principle of procurement is treating people fairly. And if you start in that place, and actually I think there's something that the industry needs to start doing, is really re-evaluating how we've got to where we are. You know, because it's off-putting to a lot of people. Some of the, you know, we've been told by a lot of people, if you use competitive dialogue, for example, I'm not in. I'm just absolutely not playing that game. And a lot of the offshore money and the private funds say, I'm happy for a developer to go those hard yards, and I'll come in once I know they've got the job. But that's a really challenging issue, because obviously sometimes we're putting quite high hurdle rates. So, you know, in terms of that procurement process, we load a lot of expectations on that procurement process. But done correctly, I think Graham was saying, it can be used as a process to align interests. So you can use that process to learn a lot about each other along the way, and at the end of it, actually, you've got something that's quite workable. So I think that for me, that's quite a big, and a really interesting place to sort of look at over the next 6 months.
Thanks. And Graham, what are your thoughts on that question?
I think we're talking about partnerships here, and I would say that a partnership isn't something to be undertaken lightly. There's lots of other mechanisms in order to bring forward land, bring forward development, work together. If you are talking about a partnership, and that partnership is something that could last 5, 10, 15 years, you have to be willing from the outset and through all of that time, be willing to commit to it. It means absolute certainty over alignment of interest. It also means a recognition that, I guess maybe one of the issues is taking the whole organisation with you, and we've worked extraordinarily hard in TfL to make sure that TfL understands we're not just a transport organisation. If you own 5,500 acres of land in London, whether you like it or not, you're a property company, and that means recruiting people, you know, having an organisational structure, the infrastructure, the governance that you'd recognise from a property company. And that's, you know, it's taken within TfL 3-4 years in order to get to where we've got to, as we're just embarking on this sort of large-scale development of our land across hundreds of sites. And there's no way that we would have been able to embark on delivery without putting all of that infrastructure in place. And so I think, you know, there are many dangers here, but they include underestimating the size of the task and overcomplicating the task rather than actually just focusing in what is it that we're actually seeking to achieve, and then bringing forward the most straightforward means of achieving that.
I think the other piece, of course, is the communication piece beyond the organisations involved to the general public, because there's some scepticism, isn't there, about public-private partnerships. They tend to think of the goals as not being particularly aligned, that the private entity is out just to make as much money as possible, and that the public entity is looking to cut costs and deliver the lowest quality products out there. So what do we need to do on that communication side of things to engage the public? Well, what's Barnet done, for instance?
Well, we've done something spectacularly badly, but we have learnt from that, and we are much better at the community engagement.
Can you give a bit more
You asked me
detail?
earlier about the surprise I had, which was I, as sitting there as leader of the council, was told in a public meeting by a developer that they couldn't deliver the affordable housing numbers that they'd said they were. That wasn't really very helpful to me in terms of handling that. Actually, they were right, they couldn't, but it was not the way to do it. It was an example of poor communications, and we are much better at that now. We do engage with people. We do make sure, with a majority of one, the ward councillors have to have agreed with something, and they know their communities. We don't need to find new ways of engagement always. There are existing structures that can work, and we've done that, and people have been supportive and worked with us on that. Barnet's quite a complicated place. I mean, A, we're quite argumentative, but B, we have a myriad of different religions. We have the largest Chinese community in London, the largest Jewish community between Tel Aviv and New York, as well as the largest Greek Cypriot community. We're a very complicated place, but it works, and we do have hooks into all those communities and can work with them successfully. The latest developments have not caused us any trouble. It is the older deals that we did some time ago, where there is a suspicion that the private sector were ripping us off. Mistaken, but the suspicion is there in the public, and we need to make sure that everyone understands what the public sector is getting out of something, as well as the private sector's profit.
So it's partly about the general public seeing a united front and that mutual trust sort of being visible, isn't it?
Yes, and the public are very perceptive and intelligent.
Okay. And Ken, can I bring you in there as well?
No, absolutely. I think one of the important things is to actually see quick wins, because when we were launching our Perfleet scheme, it was at the end of 10 years of consultation. In fact, there was massive consultation fatigue in the community, and we had to reassure them that there actually would be quick wins, because they need to see that, but within a flexible framework. And I think that's the key, is to get the framework in place that's realistic, but people realise it will change. People are pragmatic, the community are pragmatic, but at the same time you have to give them some quick wins as well.
Quick wins and an idea of what's going to be achieved in the longer term.
So the quick
as well.
wins and the flexible framework are essential, and we've set up our Perfleet website, which is interactive, where people can actually put on their views on what could be achieved, and can put images on, although we have to moderate it very quickly on occasions. But so people can actually put their thoughts up on paper. There's a community design forum we put in place that's going on tonight, and so forth. So one has to be very proactive about these things, but it's actually incredibly worthwhile when you do it.
Okay, and Paul, do you have any views here?
No question.
It was on communicating to the public and...
Yeah, I think it's when we're talking about partnerships, it's really where the public sector comes into its own. Really, as Councillor Canice was saying, it's they do really have the mechanisms and the machinery to do that, and it's one of their strengths. And I think there's sometimes a perception, there's a lack of understanding on the private sector exactly what the public sector can bring to the table, and I think that's definitely one of their strengths, certainly.
Okay, and I suppose the final question is again about sort of increasing the appeal of public-private partnerships. How do you sort of increase the appeal with investors? Because that's going to be critical, isn't it, to driving more of these sorts of partnership. What's your view on how to attract investor interest?
Well, I think firstly, it's from Chinese, it's take them time to learn about the local system and local process. But for the last few years, they learn enough lessons, and now they are quite open and they're quite flexible, and they're willing to work with local partner and local government to find more long-term strategic view. They're happy to support in very large scale regeneration project. And so
And in the regions as well now, isn't it?
Yeah,
increasingly?
from London and to the region as well. So it's really, I think first the communication is the key to communicate the government, the public sectors, and priority and strategy, and with the investors, and to find the right opportunity. And they are getting quite open. They're happy to rely on the local partner, on the public sector to really work on mutual interests. And so I think there are lots to do in this area. Because at the moment, and for lots of them, they are here, they feel they want to get involved, but they still find it hard to get into the
And they need to be taken
system.
up to the regions, don't they?
Yeah.
It's not something you can just talk about in London and hope that there's going to be some investment in a partnership in Manchester or something like that. Graham, did you have any thoughts?
No, really. I mean, just, well, little to add. I mean, what they're looking for, certainty, confidence, credibility, and the partnership that's there is something that they would feel that is the effective means of ensuring that things get done. I think investors are simple people who want things to be in place.